Radio Free Santa Clarita presents The Talk of Santa Clarita, a podcast about issues involving Santa Clarita and the surrounding valley. Episode 143, Democratic candidate to represent California's 38th Assembly District, Brandii Grace. And now, let's see what the Talk of Santa Clarita is.
And remember, this is for posterity, so be honest.
Brandii Grace, welcome to the Talk of Santa Clarita.
Thank you.
First question I have for you is the Brandii with the two eyes. Explain that for me, please. Is that like a California thing, like an LA story where the Sarah Jessica Parker's name had a little star right at the top of it, or
you know, it feels like that. My mother, that was her idea. She wanted, so her name is Kathy with one eye, and she wanted her daughter to be Brandii with two eyes. I was actually named after the song "Brandii, You're a Fine Girl."
I know that song.
And my middle name was Rhiannon, which they named me after the song Rhiannon. So they were music fans. And yeah, for some reason she decided she wanted the two eyes. I guess, you know, first and second with the eye. But the nurse apparently thought that she was just on too much morphine. So the nurse only put one eye on my name, and my mother was so angry we had a second page added to my birth certificate to add the second eye.
Really? An addendum. An addendum to the birth certificate.
And it's been a problem for me because when I go places where I have to produce my birth certificate, they're really screwing. Why are there two pages? Because they're not used to seeing that. Yeah. It's not usually a correction on the birth certificate.
Right. Well, I got to tell you, I have a lot of questions for you because I was very intrigued by your bio when I went to your website. The most important thing, the most powerful thing I thought was the pink and purple.
Thank you.
That is the first campaign website I've ever seen that is pink and purple. Is there a reason you made those choices, those colors?
You know, I tried to start a company several years ago that was. It was a company specifically to make hardcore video games for the women's market. And in order to demonstrate that, I decided to lean into what at the time was a big push for women's products that empowered women by showing it with pink and purple. I see. And so I decided to carry that forward.
I did notice the other big thing that's immediately on the splash page is Empower California. Where does that come from? Is that your personal slogan? Or is that?
I feel that government does its best job when it's there to empower the people who don't have power. When we're making sure that everybody has a seat at the table and everybody's heard. Yeah. Even the people you might not want to hear from have a right to be heard. And
does that include Ted Cruz?
Everybody.
No.
Everybody.
Damn it.
The problem is we do have an issue with our government having far too much money decide things. I mean, in this race, I've even been attacked for spending too much time in the community instead of going up to Sacramento and begging special interests for money.
Right.
And that's so backwards to what it should be. I mean, it should be, I've got so many volunteers compared to everybody else. I've made the community active. I have the policies to solve problems. That should be the thing we focus on rather than... People told me right off the bat, well, unless you have 20 rich people who can max out donate to you, it's not a viable campaign. And, you know, there's been a lot of campaigns showing that's not the case anymore. Yeah. And too many people think that's still the way it is, and it isn't.
Yeah.
So we need to push back. We need to empower everybody and come together because the divisiveness in our country is not doing us any favors.
I'll agree with you on that. You grew up in Long Beach, right? Is that where you were born?
So I was born in Long Beach, but we moved when I was a baby.
Where did you move to?
So my dad was in the Navy. I'm part of a long military family, so we got moved around. So he was stationed out at the INL in Idaho. Okay. So I went from blue California to red Idaho for part of my childhood, and then there was a series of family tragedies. So I ended up being raised mostly by my grandmother and. She and I moved around the Pacific Northwest to wherever we could find housing and a job, and we were in and out of homelessness. So
that stood out when I was reading your website. How long were you homeless for? I mean, you said
so it was always stints.
Yeah,
you know, and it's representative of something that gets very much overlooked. A lot of the current statistics show about 2/3 of the homeless population are only homeless for less than a year.
Yeah.
But the majority of our funding goes to what we qualify as chronic homeless, which are people who are homeless for more than a year or have repeated stints of a certain amount. So most of our funding is literally just sitting around doing nothing until a year has gone by. But people like with my family, where we might be living in our car for weeks or months or something, we're not getting the help. And then if that stretch continues, you can end up falling into a spiral that leads you to be chronically homeless.
Right.
And that's one of the things I want to fix. I think we do need to put resources into chronic homeless, but we also need to put in preventative funds to help those before they become homeless and before they become chronically homeless.
Sure, yeah, I agree with that. Did you mostly stay in your car when you were homeless? And
we were lucky enough to never have to be
How
on
old
the
were
street.
you in most of the time?
It was mostly during grade school years.
Yeah.
Well, no, that's not true. There were some stints. And, you know, this is another problem, is that definitions of homelessness change.
Yeah, I recently I used to work for a homeless shelter, so I'm very sensitive. Yeah, I'm very sensitive to the cause. And recently did a show with Joe Messina, and Joe seemed to find that couch surfing should not be construed as homeless. It's like, dude.
No. I mean, if you're sleeping on somebody's couch, if you're sleeping on somebody's floor, yeah, that's the first step. Most people, when they lose their home for whatever reason, they go to a hotel if they can afford it, and then they start going to people's houses.
Yeah.
I mean, during the recent evacuations, I was evacuated from my home in Porter Ranch due to the wildfires. First thing we did that night was try to find a hotel room, and it took us most of the night. We found a place at like 5, 6 in the morning, and I mean, here's myself, my husband, my 4-year-old autistic son, and my 80-something disabled grandmother. Yeah. And, I mean, we couldn't go to a shelter. It didn't have ADA compliance for what she needed or what he needed. And when we found a hotel, I mean, it was really expensive. The first hotel room, the only one we found, was something like $600 a night. Yeah. And that was the only one available. So very quickly, I had friends that were contacting us. Hey, I have a brother who's got a rooms down in wherever. And that would have been the next step. We had plans that if it lasted too long, we would either sleep at friends' houses, or we would go to my husband's place in Texas. His mother lives out there. I mean, that's the next step. Once you lose those network connections, that's when you end up, if you have a car, you end up in your car. And when that doesn't work, you end up in a park, in a tent, on the street. Because it takes a while to get into shelters.
Yeah, so it does. People don't seem to realize that there's sometimes waiting lists and everything else just to even get into them.
And there's a lot of terminology changes. Some people don't like the phrase homeless anymore. They want to say unsheltered or unhoused or housing insecure.
Yeah, I know.
Some of that's coming from the homeless community because they're trying to get rid of stigmas. The problem is when we promote, like, I'm working on a job fair right now targeting the homeless community. And if I don't say that it's targeting the homeless community, most people won't know what we're talking about. Right. If we say unsheltered, I don't want the people living in shelters to think that this is excluding them.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's not an easy problem. The thing that stood out also was, you did most of the work to lift yourself out of poverty, with the words on the website. What were you doing? I mean, were you going to school and working at the same time and helping your grandmother? And
I had my first actual paying job, not counting babysitting, my first paying job at the age of 8.
Okay.
Yeah. Not paying very much. It was clearly under the table, and it was at a local church where basically the church owner saw it as a way of giving me an allowance, but also helping my family. And I think she had the idea that I would just do some chores around the church, but the people under her treated me as a straight-up janitor. So they'd have me, those bottles of chemicals that say keep out of reach of children, they're handing me with stuff, no masks. I'm on the floor scrubbing stuff with dangerous chemicals.
You experienced child labor.
Yeah, pretty directly.
Yeah.
And then after that, I did a lot of things with my grandmother. I helped her deliver newspapers. She had a lot of jobs scrubbing floors and toilets that I would do with her, and child care stuff that we did. I eventually went into sales by the age of 10.
Sales? What were you selling?
At the ballparks. It turned out that in the state of Idaho, a child under labor laws, could work for commission, which is how they maintained paper routes being legal.
I see.
But that meant that I could go to the ballparks and places like that and get a job selling programs and raffle tickets. And I was always the top seller. So I would go in and just learn really quickly how to sell. And that became the funds over the summer that I made in particular was how I paid for my school supplies and my school clothes and gas and food when we needed it.
It's an amazing challenge you were going through. I mean, did you... I'd assume there were some really tough moments where you were probably like, why is it this way for me? And or did you just kind of accept it because that was the way you grew up?
There were things I accepted. What was actually harder were issues that were going on with the rest of my family.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about them or not?
Depends on how dark you want this to go. We'll just say one of my parents dated a pedophile, and we'll leave it at that.
Okay.
So there were reasons I stayed with my grandmother, and I cared for her. But there were issues like, I mean, by the time I was 12, this elderly woman had been scrubbing toilets and floors and working 3 jobs and 4 jobs sometimes to keep us afloat, started having physical repercussions. She had severe arthritis, and by the time I was 12, there was a stint where she couldn't dress herself, she couldn't go to the bathroom on her own, she was disabled at that point. So I would dress her in the morning and help her use the bathroom, and I'd go to school and I'd come home and help take care of her, and if I had work at that time, I'd go to work. And so there were times where, because she couldn't sign her name, I would fill out her taxes, I would fill out stuff, and there were things that I looked at it as kind of an amusement. Hey, I'm the only 6th grader who knows how to fill out tax forms.
Yeah, I still don't know how.
I just looked at it as a constant way of learning and growing in that way. Yeah. I recognized that, I wanted to be out playing with the other kids, and I couldn't a lot of times, but...
Were you a good student?
Sometimes. In the early years, I really was. Quite frankly, when I couldn't eat, that's when... There were times I was literally taking a math test and I'd fall asleep during the math test, and I'd wake up and the math test was over. So that didn't do well for my grades. Yeah. And my teachers didn't understand, so they would complain about, she's clearly smart, why is she not getting all A's? And they put me into an advanced class that I had to pass an IQ test to get in. So they're like, well, maybe she's just bored. Yeah. And I did well in that. That's where I learned computer programming that was 6th grade it started.
Started computer. What was the first language you learned?
So it was Turtle.
Turtle.
Yeah, it was visual programming. So it was this is a dot. Several dots in a row create a line. 4 lines in a box create a square, and so it was visual programming to create images. But yeah, I mean, I think more than anything else, I became very sensitive to what it means to have money and not have money. Yeah. So I was very, very focused on wanting to have enough money to be able to do things to make sure nobody else was going through what I was going through. So even by the age of 8, I was actually involved in politics. In Idaho, there was a group of Republicans that I learned very quickly what Republicans were at that point, that were trying to get rid of the free school lunch program. Okay. And that was basically my meals. Yeah. So I started getting involved because I'm like, why would an adult want to take food out of the mouths of hungry children? And that's when I started getting introduced to politics. I apologize that my phone is going off. I thought I turned off the ringer.
That's okay.
Okay.
It happens. So
my apologies to the audience. And I forgot what I was talking about.
Well, you were telling me about being involved in politics. So let me ask you this.
Go ahead.
Because it's interesting you bring all that up. Because Mike Garcia, who's running for Congress, a Republican, friend of the show, he would talk about growing up and seeing, the different housing and being taught by his grandfather. I believe he said it was grandfather about what do you think they did to be able to buy a house like that and everything like that. And that's where he got his Republican ideas and ideals. Why are you a Democrat? Why? How did you become a Democrat? Is it because of the school free lunch program, or what happened?
Yeah, that was the start of it. Yeah. I got to know the politics at the time, and I mean, we're talking late 80s, early 90s. Okay. And I watched the debates. Yeah. I was probably the only one in school of my age that was watching the presidential debates. And I was listening to Bush Sr., and I'm going, he sounds like these people that are doing this. And then I found out, they're all from the same party. Mm-hmm. I grew up very much in a red state. I don't have anything against Republicans. I just think that they miss things sometimes.
Yeah.
And to be fair, everyone on all sides of the political spectrum do. But it's easy to say things like, "Oh, just pull yourself up by your bootstraps." That's an easy way, for example, to look at it.
But not everybody has bootstraps.
Not everybody has bootstraps. Yeah. And it's invisible to a lot of people what some of the barriers are.
Yeah.
I mean, as much as I've been able to bring myself from being a homeless child to being someone who ran a company and led a union movement and teaches in college and works in video games and all these wonderful things I've done,
right.
I still recognize that I'm an able-bodied human being. I'm white, and that has privilege to it. I have gender problems I've had to overcome, and I've had class problems I've had to overcome, but I haven't been denied the right to marry my husband. Because we're both heterosexuals. Now, that may have been not the case a few decades ago because we're a different race, but it's easy when you don't have to fight to get over some barriers,
right,
to not notice the barriers are there for others. Yeah. And that's usually what I find with a lot of good Republicans is that they have good values and they have good ideas about how they think the economy should work. And if it worked the way they thought it did, they'd probably be right. But I'll give you a good example.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Free markets.
Sure.
Free markets with particular, we'll talk about healthcare, for example.
Yeah.
When they say, oh, well, we just need more transparency laws to see what the costs are at a hospital and let the free market take care of it after that. Well, the problem is that if you're unconscious in an ambulance, you have no idea and no say over what's going on. Plus, the hospitals will sometimes use intentional misdirection, so they'll call a Kleenex like a mucus delivery device, something that most people would have no idea you're talking about charging $8 for a Kleenex.
Right.
So, in theory, free market should work, but free market has to have certain things in place that aren't generally in place. Like, we have to have perfect knowledge of what's going on.
Yeah.
If you have two companies, A and B, that are competing, and everything is equal and one of them is charging less, then they'll probably make more money. But if the reason they're charging less is that they're dumping toxic waste instead of paying to have it hauled off, and you don't know that, then is the free market really acting appropriately? Because there wasn't, the consumers didn't know about the dumping, otherwise they wouldn't have patroned company A, and by the time that comes out, they could be the monopoly. So the values that they come from make theoretical sense a lot of times, but in practical use often overlook a lot of substantial things. So
the
really
just let it go.
Okay.
Very popular.
I don't know why it's not, the ringtone says it's off. I don't know why it's doing that.
And you're supposed to be good with technology. So
I did not program the Samsung phone.
Actually, let's talk about computers a little bit. You started learning language in 6th grade, you said. Have you always been like a computer nerd, geek about programming and stuff like that? Or how did you get into doing video games?
It's hard to say like saying always doesn't really work because, to be frank, most of my life I didn't have access to computers. So, I mean, my first computer was just an electric typewriter that somebody donated to my family.
Sure.
And in fact, all the way up through my computer science courses in college, every computer I'd had was donated.
Wow.
And it was, so I was always several generations behind working on very old systems. So I'm in these classes trying to program advanced AI on these like really, really old like Windows 3.1 systems, sometimes with floppy drives when everybody else is burning DVRs. But I always saw computers as a great tool, and I've always seen technology as something that I thought would do great things for our society.
So you're doing video games?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, how is that great? Because I'll tell you.
Go for it.
I spent many quarters on video games when I was growing up, and I have finally come to the conclusion that video games are like the worst thing on the planet. Because
we can argue over this one.
You think so?
Oh, yeah.
Well, let me tell you why.
Go ahead.
Okay. anything else you do requires some type of exercise in the sense of either mental exercise or physical exercise. Video games, you just sit there and play. And I think it's the most, for me at least, I have found them to be just mind-numbing. And I have issues with, even my kid playing the video games. So am I wrong?
Yes.
Okay, explain to me why am I wrong.
I'm curious first, what games are you playing?
What games am I playing?
Yeah, that you think are mind-numbing. I'm curious.
Donkey Kong, Tempest,
okay.
Pac-Man.
Pac-Man. Okay.
No, I look at my kid playing Fortnite and I go, I don't even know what he's doing.
I mean, I've for example, I advised on a game that was being developed to teach OSHA regulations.
Okay. All right. Well, see, that's different.
It is, and that's there's different games. I've worked on a whole slew of games, but even when I'm working on the action games, like I worked on one of the very old Call of Duty games. You're still learning map reading skills and hand-eye coordination. So even in those games, seriously, you are.
I know.
Like the first time I picked up a gun, the only time I picked up a gun at a shooting range, I was able to get pretty good marks on it for a first timer.
Because you've done Call of Duty kind of stuff?
Yeah, because I've done stuff in games. So there's a reason that America's Army is funded by the Army as both a recruiting and training tool. Like there's serious things here. But I'll give you another good example of why I think games are really a good thing and why I'm a big fan of them. My son, so he's 4 right now. He's in special needs preschool. When he was 2, almost 3, he was diagnosed with severe autism and severe speech delay. He couldn't say a word. He would just say, ooh, ooh, ooh.
Let me guess, he responded to an iPad or something like that.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Well, even more than that, what happened was after they diagnosed him, I mean, I had somebody that told me, you should be prepared for the idea he might never speak.
Yeah.
But we weren't keeping the people away from him. He was in the room when he was diagnosed. He was in the room when people told us what to expect. And as soon as we closed the door, after the speech professional left, I saw my son turn around and walk straight over and pick up his tablet and go to a language game.
Oh, wow.
And then he picked up the remote and he turned on a TV show that he hadn't watched in months, that he never showed interest in before, that was a language show, PBS language show. And he sat there, and for the next several months, every day he picked up that tablet, he started working, and he'd he would show a picture of fries, and he'd click on it, fries, and he got the word. So by the next year, after he'd done that, and he'd gone into school, and he came out, not only had he learned to speak, not only had he beaten all of his school goals, they have something called an IEP, an Individualized Education Plan, and not only had he surpassed his language goals, they said he was advanced linguistically in many levels for someone his age. So he went from zero speech to advanced. And a lot of that is the time that he spent on those games. Okay.
Well, I'll take a step back then.
So I think it comes down to it depends on the game, and it depends on how you use it.
Yeah. Well, I'm a walking contradiction in the sense that I think video games are bad, but I think the fact that somebody can program them is incredibly cool. Designing them seems like a really fun thing to do.
I love it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you say Call of Duty. Are there any other games that people would know that you've worked on, or?
I worked on the Xbox 360 itself. Okay. So they've probably heard of that. I worked on the Matrix Online, of all things. But,
really?
So you've probably heard of the Matrix, if nothing else. But that was actually my first project. I was a design intern back when there basically weren't any design interns, so that was a big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked on a lot of little things. I mostly, this point in my career, I spent a lot of time educating others. So I've developed a lot of degree programs. I taught at DigiPen, helped create their game design program. Okay. But
do you like teaching more than designing?
I like them because it's both. Like when I'm teaching, I have to, for one thing, I have to design the curriculum, which is in of itself designing. Yeah. But I have to help the students because they'll come to me with things that don't work, and I know where the landmines are, and I'll help them. Okay, this won't work. Here's why this won't work. Let's brainstorm a way to design around it. And so I'll work with them. It's still designing games. It's just in a way that lets them lead. Yeah. And quite frankly, people don't think, game design and government mix. But when you're designing a game, you have to design a system and a rule set and an economy that is fair for everyone in the community. And what's government other than creating a system of rules and economics that are fair for everybody in the community?
Yeah.
And so and working with a lot of people to do it is like game development. You have to work in large teams. A book writer can sit down on their own and write a book, but game design is so difficult to do as a solitary person. Yeah. It's extraordinarily rare when it happens.
Now, is this the first time you've run for anything?
No, I'm one of the only. I think I'm the only person in this race that's actually holding an elected seat right now.
Okay, what is the seat you hold?
I'm in the Port Ranch Neighborhood Council.
Okay,
which is a government seat under the LA City Council.
Okay.
But so aside from that, I ran for county delegate a few years ago. I didn't run too hard because I was at the end of the ballot, and with delegate seats, it was exactly as we expected. It was voted down the ballot.
Right, yeah.
And I had worked with the people, so I knew I was going to get an alternate seat.
Yeah.
But I was on the ballot for that, and I started to run for the LA City seat, the CD12 special race that happened. And I bowed out very quickly because my grandfather went into hospice care and went into a coma and passed away. So
I'm sorry.
It's all right. My family needed me. There were 28 people in the race at that point, and I said, you know what, it's too short a time to run. My family comes first. My party comes first. My community comes first. I will just step out and throw my support behind who I think can win.
So what about now? I mean, did you have any plans until the whole Katie Hill, Christy Smith stepping up and everything like that? You just kind of were you recruited? Did you just decide to do it, or what happened exactly?
Yeah, I mean, it was the same this round as it was with the city council race. I had people who immediately found out about the resignation and started contacting me. You have to run for this. You have to run for this. I mean, I've been so involved in the community because I live right next to Aliso Canyon, so I've been a big fighter for shutting it down.
Kind of have to be, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm a co-founding co-chair of the West Valley Neighborhood Alliance on Homelessness. So I've been working in the community for so long.
Right.
I was the first call for a lot of people for both those seats, and I wasn't sure because I was thinking, well, I this is such a big step and such a short window to run, and I took a little bit of time to figure out, okay, can I do this seriously? If I do, what can I do? And the thing that kept coming up was people said, we loved you when you were running for city council. The only thing is we thought a lot of your policies matched better for state. So why don't you just run for state where your policies can make a difference everywhere?
Yeah.
And they're right. A lot of my policies involved stateside stuff. So I'm very policy driven. I'm very much the policy wonk.
Well, I want to get into some of your policies.
Excellent. I love talking about that.
You kind of keep going back into your policy stuff as I'm trying to just
drag me out.
Yeah. So
I'm the policy wonk.
Yeah, that's a good thing. Christy, in 2 years or almost 2 years of being in her seat, has done quite a bit.
Yes.
I'm curious. The simplest question is, how are you like Christy and how are you not like Christy? I mean, what can people expect if you take over the seat?
I mean, she's been a very strong advocate for education, which I will be as well. I mean, I have a child in public education, so of course I want to fully fund it. I've already told her that should she win the special and have to drop her seat immediately to go to Congress, and I win, I will immediately take up a bill she's pushing right now that I think is very important. It's the way our schools are funded right now, dating back to Prop 98, the funding is directly tied to attendance.
Right.
So every day that my son stays home with a fever, the school loses about $50. And unfortunately, that also counted when the school shut down due to the fires. So when they closed out of safety and precaution due to the smoke and the fire, every day it was closed for every single student, they lost funding out of a school that is not that rich to begin with. So she's trying to create a bill that to push through an exemption so that they won't lose their funding when they close down due to an emergency. And I will absolutely take that up. I've in fact been pushing on wanting to find a way to change it so that we don't tie it to attendance, but rather to monthly enrollment. So that sick kids aren't being pressured into going to school. And I've heard from parents of terminal and chronically ill children that say that they are constantly pressured and threatened because the schools need them to be there, and that's not what anybody wants. So I will take that up. That's the kind of pro-education.
Well, how are you different though?
I'm different from pretty much most of the assembly in the fact that I have a deep understanding of the technology side of things.
Sure.
I mean, we saw what happened with the net neutrality fight. And there were good Democrats who were having their head turned by the ISPs that were convincing them, oh, net neutrality will hurt the poor. No. That's a bold-faced lie. But they don't understand the technology well enough to know where they are lying or getting it wrong. There was a bill that Christy actually voted in favor of that I am strongly against. I believe it was 1366.
Which is what?
It was banning regulation on ISPs, basically.
Oh, really?
Yes. It was an extension of a ban on regulation. So thankfully it died.
We need that. We desperately
need it. This bill, extending this bill would have protected the monopolies that we've seen in the state of California. So that it's why most of the viewers out there probably have one or at most two options of broadband choices. It also would have prevented us from putting any kind of privacy protections on voice over phone calls, voice over IP. So it was literally a gift to the ISPs, but they were able to couch it in language and terminology to make it sound like it was a good thing, and it wasn't. So I very easily would have known this is wrong, and I would have voted against it, and I would have been one of the stalwarts going, no, we need to stop this, and explaining to the rest of the assembly why this was wrong.
It seems like to me that the way the internet has grown in the past 20 years, that, I mean, it's almost like the laws around it are dated. It's like it's overcome. I mean, I used to make this argument about Napster. Napster, in my book, was legal. It's just that the technology was different than what the laws had established already. And I'm sure I've got some recording artists listening right now going, no, Napster was bad.
Napster was bad and good. It wasn't all one thing. There were problems on both sides.
Well, I always maintain that it was the fault of the record labels because they weren't providing the singles anymore.
Right.
You know what I mean?
They mismanaged the system.
I always said before iTunes came up, it's like people will pay 99 cents or whatever, a dollar for a song if it was available to them. It's the record companies that are screwing themselves. They're just going after them getting off on a tangent.
No, and it's a good tangent because that still carries forward today. Whether you're a music recording artist or a film artist or any kind of content creator, if you misunderstand what your audience wants, someone else is going to find a way to get it that you might not like. And there have been, like with the recording industry, people that try to say, well, let's just protect the industry the way it is right now and keep it frozen.
Can't do that.
And you can't. And we need to have people who understand these kind of issues and can work with them and say, look, we don't want this industry to die. We want it to flourish. Let's help you find a way to flourish in the new ecosystem.
It is interesting how much the recording industry is changing now. I mean, it's the idea that most artists now, as opposed to them making money off the record sales, are now making money out of touring only. And you're seeing that now with the movie industry as well, because more and more. Charlie Vignola, a friend of the show who works at Bruckheimer Entertainment, has told me it's like people look for like what's their YouTube channel? How many likes do they have? What have they done that already has an audience pre-built into through the internet?
How many Twitter followers they have?
Exactly. So it seems to me like going back to the idea that the internet itself has kind of become, the laws behind it are kind of dated. Why aren't ISPs a public utility? This point, I mean, why can't that be done? Is that something? Is that something that you would think about, or is that something that's just not possible?
That's what we were aiming for on the federal level. So, God, I don't want to go into a half-hour conversation about Title I, Title II, but basically there was...
I don't want you to either.
Yeah, I'm sure most of the like 3 people in your audience are going, yes, do that. If you want to know, look up the John Oliver episode.
That actually 3 people was the entire audience here. So.
we tried to go that direction federally, and what happened is this administration has gone the other direction, where it's become a protectorate of it, to the point that they actually said states aren't even allowed to regulate at all. So we've been fighting that through several states. Attorneys general have been fighting back on that, and it looks like we're making progress. But that's something that's going to happen at the federal level.
Yeah.
But there are other things that we can do at the state level. Yeah. And I've been reaching out to content creators and their agents and managers recently because, and I've been talking with people like Cory Doctorow at the EFF about how we can do better to protect fair use and content creators.
EFF is what?
The Electronic Frontier Foundation.
Okay.
They're the big nonprofit that's in favor of fair use and Creative Commons and digital rights and things like that. They're a lot like the ACLU, but for the internet.
Okay.
They
geeky lawyers is what you're saying.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
What I want to do is make sure that we can stop what are called the copyright trolls. Because right now, if you're on, for example, YouTube, I could just go onto the platform and say, here's some random video, and I could falsely claim that you have infringed on my copyright, and therefore go to you and say, if you don't pay me $2,000, I'm going to put a strike on your video. I'm going to do that for 3 of your videos, and as soon as you get 3 strikes on your videos, then your channel's automatically deleted.
Wow.
You'll lose all your income. You'll lose all your followers. There are ways to counter that, but a lot of content creators don't have the time and money to fight. And I mean, YouTube just went after a copyright troll that was doing this kind of fraudulent extortion, and it cost YouTube, that they said, significant money to go after them, and that was YouTube doing it. And it took a long time and a lot of money, and there's countless victims of his. So there are things that we could do in the law to better protect from stuff like that we're not doing right now. So yeah.
Well, let's talk about. I noticed a lot of you point out senior and disability care, improving the cost controls, medical and affordable health care, how to cap medical expenses, and things like that. Just what are your ideas on how you're going to do that? You know, I mean, it's you brought up the $8 Kleenex, which I already feel ripped off because I've been paying like $16, but that's another story. But I mean, what are your ideas to try and fix that problem?
Right. So I want to pattern I want to create caps on hospital costs that are similar to the ones we've seen in Virginia and Maryland. There are so many things that they are overcharging on to an excessive rate. Like the one I like to talk about, because it's easy, everybody's experienced it. Those little plastic cups that the restaurants give you to hold your ketchup in, or your mustard, or relish, or they, in bulk, about 3 cents for it. That's why they give it away for free. At the hospital, they use them to hand you your pills. They charge an average of $10 a piece.
Really?
It's not even for the nurse's salary to hand it to you. That's just, it's not for the gloves. The plastic gloves she's holding that cup with, those are non-sterile gloves. They're about 20 cents a pair when you get them at Costco. Like if I buy them at Costco. They charge an average of $53 for that one pair. That gets, of course, thrown away because we need to constantly be throwing those away. Those are ridiculous price gouging. That's price gouging, straight up.
When Obamacare was going through, there was an article written in Time Magazine, I think was expanded into a book about, because I remember seeing him on The Daily Show, the guy that had written the article about the fact that medical costs, the problem with healthcare wasn't so much about the insurance itself, he was arguing, but more about the way the exorbitant costs are being put on things like you're talking about.
Exactly.
Yeah. So what are you going to do? Regulate that? I mean, just...
I mean, it's very straightforward. We set a base cost. We could set it according to Medicare or according to cost of labor and actual supplies or some other base that we choose, and then say you can't charge more than this percentage over that. And make sure that that covers any taxes, that covers any labor, that covers everything. But isn't 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000 times what the actual cost is?
Is that playing the devil's advocate? Though, I mean, if they're charging, say, $10 for a cup or something like that, is that more of, we're paying this much for one thing, but to be able to charge
for others,
we have to offset the cost, and charge $10 for this so we can get this,
That's the common argument, but it doesn't bear out when you look at it.
Okay.
I mean, there are excessive salaries that you can always, and I've experienced this when I was running a union movement, that anybody can try to claim poverty by spending a lot in areas to, as one person did, spent a lot of money on building with a company that was owned by, I think, their brother, and their brother then would pay them. So there's ways of spending money so you look poor. And in the state of California, we require that there be something like a 20% discount for uninsured. But if I'm spending $10 on a 3-cent cup, a 20% discount is still price gouging the person who doesn't have insurance and is too poor to be able to afford it. And even, there's a lot of pressure for things like state of California to pass Medicare for all. Yeah. My grandmother's on Medicare, and she was in the hospital this year. They gave her 8 pills, and I looked up the cost. It includes like a handful of aspirin and stuff. And the cost for those pills individually in bulk would have been $1.85. They charged her $79 for those 8 pills. Wow. So even on Medicare currently, it doesn't cover everything. So we still need to be capping these costs, and we need to. I also would like to see more of pressure to ensure that we keep our public hospitals public and nonprofit and not become privatized for profits. That's one of the things that causes some of this.
Do you support the idea of Medicare for all?
God, at this point, I support the idea of anything that helps give everybody public insurance.
That's a good answer.
We have basically nothing.
Well, also another thing I thought was interesting was you talked about fully funded education. Now, are you talking about free college, or are you talking about just community college? Or?
I'm so glad you asked that, because a lot of people don't realize that our public higher education is part of public education, and it is. To me, when I tell people I'm pro-education, I'm about fully funding, I actually mean from pre-K all the way through to higher education. And yeah, I think what we did with the community colleges this year was great, extending it to 2 year. I don't think it's enough. I mean, the average cost for tuition for a full-time student that we're covering with the free tuition is around $1,400. I don't want to just say a semester. There's also trimesters, a session. But that's not where most of their funds go. There's an average of about $20,000 per session or per year, depending, that they have to pay on housing, on transportation, on books, on lab fees. So even if we just wipe out tuition, there's still other things that we need to cover. And it's only covering full-time students. So the single mom who's going to college to try to get a degree isn't getting that unless she has to continue working. So we do need to do more than we've started. But we definitely need to start walking back the costs. And part of it on the higher education side is holding accountable the executive salaries. I mean, they can increase executive salaries very quickly and in off seasons when the public doesn't get a chance to have input on it, and that's wrong. We need to go in and put pressure on keeping those executive salaries down so that the funds go where they need to. And as we saw with in the fight for student athletes trying to get funding, and the colleges saying, "Oh, we can't afford it. We don't have any money." And then you look, and they're spending ridiculous amounts of money building these huge stadiums, or I've seen things that look like basically health spas. They should be spending that money on things the students need, like more housing. I mean, we have an exploding homeless college student problem in the state. We have an exploding homelessness problem, but homeless college students is growing. And we need them to be spending the funds where it needs to be. So,
with the one of the things also that I noticed was, obviously homelessness is an issue that's important to you, and you talked about cleaner and cheaper energy. What is the solution to one of the problems that I think a lot of people would argue about California is CEQA, is that it slows things down as far as building.
I've heard that.
Yeah. You don't agree with that? Or what?
No.
I mean, the argument a lot of what people would say is that CEQA needs to be modified. on some level, or at least like a waiver of some sort to allow for immediate housing to be built. What are your thoughts on that?
So studies have come out that have shown that CEQA is not the main thing that's holding up development of housing. It's actually things like developer fees and the time it takes to get permits through. So we need to put more funding into staffers so that they can process things, not just CEQA, but other things that need to be processed faster.
Okay.
And we need to put more funds into developing things that are affordable housing. Like SB 50, people thought was going to do that, but you could build up to 20 housing units before a single unit that's affordable housing. So that's not doing it either. But with CEQA, I mean, there are things I would like to see changed of it, but not the things that the people complaining about it are talking about.
Right.
There's actually parts of it that need to be strengthened. And there's things that need to be enforced that are not.
Right.
Plus, there's issues like if I'm a developer, I could hire you to do the environmental evaluation. That one's not mine.
Oh, it's mine this time.
Futurama, excellent. I was like, is that Futurama? Yeah.
I'm a nerd.
Yes, high five. Futurama is fantastic. It was a great series.
Yeah.
So I could hire you to do it, and then because I'm paying you, you're incentivized to, maybe undercut the mitigation necessities for building here and make it cheaper for me. So maybe we shouldn't have the people doing the reports be hired by the people that they're reporting on.
Yeah.
That's something that we could fix. But yeah, I mean, it's very rare that a full environmental impact report is requested. And this is a thing that I think developers and environmentalists alike will agree with. What we do need to do is make sure that when somebody is suing on behalf of CEQA, is pushing through these reports, that we know who they are, that they have to register, not just hide behind names of, that sound like, fruity tooty citizens for whatever, but actually show that maybe it's a rival developer.
I think fruity tooty citizens whatever is playing Coachella.
There you go.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
It's okay. I mean, a rival developer that wants to stop it can create this AstroTurf organization and then fund the lawsuits to stall out a project indefinitely.
Right.
And that's wrong. Nobody benefits from that. So we need to have some transparency involved in that part of it. So there are things that can be modified, but it's not about things that would in any way endanger the environment or lessen the mitigations that we really need.
Okay. The one of the more controversial bills that have been going through the Assembly right now is AB 5. What are your thoughts on AB 5? This is for people who don't know, basically for Lyft drivers and Uber drivers, and from what I understand, basically contract for hire people in general. So
it's about making sure that employees aren't intentionally miscategorized as contract employees, that they are actually treated as employees when they are legitimately employees. Now, the big problem with it, I love that they were doing that, because we have a serious problem with miscategorization of employees. That is a serious problem in the country, not just California. But the problem with AB 5 was that there was no option for the employee to choose to opt out of being determined. And the system that we encoded for determining whether or not someone is an employee was a little too broad. And so we're seeing like the truckers themselves are suing to fight back because they don't want to be classified as employees. They own their own trucks. They want to have the freedom of being a freelancer. So there's a difference between the exploited worker who wants the access to the full benefits and isn't getting them because the employer's exploiting them, and we want to be freelancers, don't make us register as full-time employees because that'll hurt our business ideals. So we need to put in the option for an employee to choose to opt out. And protections so that employers can't.
Would you have voted for it as it is now?
I think I would have been spending so much time pushing for the opt out.
But as it is right now,
I don't know.
That's bad, politician.
Well, no, I mean, I don't know. The reason I say I don't know is it depends on how long it would have taken us to get to where. I think it's going to end up having that exemption, because I've been talking to every.
Makes sense. It's logical.
Yeah, and everyone I've talked to, of course, the unions loved this, and I'm a huge union fan. They're all in favor of this exemption. So I can't imagine it would have stayed the way it is, and I'm generally not in favor of passing bad laws and fixing them later. I want to fix it up front and then pass it.
Okay.
So I don't think there would have been a necessity to vote on it as is. I think we would have just fixed it sooner.
Okay. What's the first thing you want to do if you're elected? What's the very first thing, other than finding your office?
I was going to say, let's say, be fair, the very first thing you're doing is staffing to make sure that... the first thing I've already started for my first thing, which is going around and talking to different organizations and different entities and community members about what their concerns are and what the solution, talking with them about the possible solutions and getting them on board with what I've got as my day one agenda.
Yeah.
So I've already started. That's the first thing. And day one will be a continuation of that. It'll be, okay, now we can legitimately start pushing. And so I'm going to bring in the staff and say, all right, we've worked out these details. Let's move forward now. Okay. So it'll be going to more of my fellow assembly members and already pushing forward on the agenda that I've established already.
Okay. We have a new segment on the show.
Okay.
Where my kid asks a question.
Aww. How old's your kid?
He is 8. His name is Ryan. And
doesn't have $28 million on YouTube, does he?
No. Although he seems interested in doing something of that nature. So, but his question is:
my dad says you know a lot about video games. Can you show me how to win Fortnite?
Probably not. I wish I could.
Okay, well,
you have to play fair, but I could play with you.
Let's get the elevator pitch from you about why someone should vote for you, and then we're going to have some little fun. That's some silly questions.
I mean, the elevator pitch is that I'm running because I've already been doing this kind of thing for so long. I'm already active in the community. Yeah. I already have the plan. I mean, ask my opponents. Who has a day one agenda? We had a question recently at a forum where they asked the same question you did. What are you going to do on day one? And their answers were all, we're going to go ask people what they want us to do. It was, we're going to go in the community on a listening tour. I've already done that. I already know what the problems are. I already know what the solutions are. I'm already working on it.
Yeah.
So, you know, I've gone to the federal government and pushed through regulation already. It was to protect workers on a federal level. I'm holding a government office position. Yeah. I'm already doing this stuff. So I was already working with this office, in fact, to push through a new bill that I helped write. And it was my idea that we need to put, this is a little bit out of the weeds, but I want to create a pilot program to fund upgrading our public school playgrounds to be ADA compliant.
That's a great idea.
Yeah. Well, actually, it was the law that we do so back in 2012. Really? That was the deadline for all publicly owned playgrounds, parks, and schools to be ADA compliant. We are nowhere near that. Yeah. And worse, in the school districts, it's often the parents who are expected to front the money to upgrade.
Really?
Yeah. So these can be $250,000 projects to make sure that there are sufficient ramps, that there are sufficient swings for kids with cerebral palsy, and just to give everyone fair access so that kids with disabilities aren't being ostracized by the equipment.
Right.
And you go into a poor community and a disadvantaged community, especially in the communities of color, they can't afford anything. Yeah. So their kids are more likely to be disenfranchised by that in the first place. And just a pilot program to even start pushing on it, I think will build the momentum we need to get that going across the state of California.
Have you always been a policy wonk? You obviously seem to know. You know a lot about policy, obviously. But I mean, is this more of okay? I'm going to run. I'm going to study up, or is this stuff you just knew?
No, this is stuff I've been doing for a long time.
Nerd.
I am such a nerd. I'm the only one I know who excitedly goes through and researches obscure policy issues. I mean, I love watching Last Week Tonight from John Oliver. Yeah. Because when he does, it's like, oh, I've already seen that. I've already read that report. And then he'll come up with something new. I'm like, I haven't seen that report yet. And I go research whatever he came up with so I can say, oh, now I understand this one because I hadn't seen that report.
You know, I can't watch him anymore because it's very educational what he does, but I almost find it depressing because it's sort of like, okay, here's one more problem we have to worry about in this country, you know, and you probably weren't even aware of, but here's another problem, another problem, and it's hard for me to sometimes. It's like I just don't want to deal with it, you know. Not that.
That's why you vote for someone like me to deal with it for you.
To deal with it up for me, okay.
And see, this is actually a critical thing, especially in this day and age. People are getting exhausted. Mm-hmm. They're tired of following all of the scary news reports that they've heard from everywhere, and we have growing problems. I mean, the homelessness crisis continues to expand year after year after year. And we had last year 1,000 people die on the streets in LA, just in LA City.
Horrible.
So this is a problem that is the epitome of everything else because all problems lead to it. Homelessness isn't its own issue. It's the consequence of all the failures of all the other things, from poor housing policy to lack of good jobs to lack of good education support to student debt, auto debt, home debt, lack of pensions, lack of disability. All of this feeds in and creates a homelessness crisis that's exploding. Yeah. So we need people who don't just, I care about the issue and I want to find out about the issue, but I understand the issue. Here's 20 things we need to do to start fighting back against it. Here's my plan to implement those 20 things. And that's me.
All right. Let's have some fun.
Excellent.
You are a nerd, so let's see where you go with this. Marvel or DC?
Oh, crap. Dark Horse.
Dark Horse. Whoa! Out of the box. Well done.
Why I assume you're just talking about comics.
Is it Dark Horse because that's the Buffy stuff? Or
I like Buffy. So I've actually been part of the Comic Book Sunday. I have a lot of friends who are professional comic artists and writers, and I worked on the DCU game.
Oh, did you really?
Yeah,
nice.
I worked on it back when it was with Monolith / Warner Brothers.
Yeah.
I'm sad a lot of my stuff didn't stay in, but I'm friends with people who did it later, who implemented it. And I mean, Marv Wolfman's a good friend of mine, and he's worked DC and Marvel. So it's hard when I'm looking at. I have friends. On
they
all
both
these
have their specialties.
But yeah, I mean,
the good and bad. I suppose.
I like the indie stuff.
Do you really?
Yeah, I like indie stuff. I like one-off stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, one of my favorite comics is a 3-part series. It's just like 3 comics. It's not in any other universe, and it's this idea of what happens if the bad guy wins. So it starts from very first moment. There's never a fight to it. The bad guy has already won years ago. Yeah. Here's the dystopian society with the megalomaniac in charge.
What is the comic?
I wish I could remember the name. I'm blanking on it. I'll have to find it. But it's interesting to see the different dynamics at play in this just 3 comic story. And I like those little one-off things.
Yeah. I actually was always a big fan of Marvel's What If.
Those are fun.
Yeah, because they'd be one-offs about kind of crazy ideas that, what would happen if this happened.
If I'm being honest, I'm going to say I like the What Ifs from Futurama better.
Okay. Star Trek or Star Wars?
Star Trek.
Really? What's your favorite series?
TNG.
Really? Mm-hmm. Did you see the new Picard show yet?
Not yet.
Oh my God, it's so good.
I haven't had time. I'm running.
Let's totally geek out in front of everybody. It is so good.
I've heard. I'm super excited because of 7 of 9 was my favorite character in the end of Voyager. Yeah. And Picard is. We tried for a short time to consider naming our son after Picard. We just couldn't. We're not French and we're not British and we couldn't find a way for Jean-Luc to work. But I mean, he's definitely someone I look up to. Yeah. I think a lot of stuff from TNG has led me to my opinions on how government should run. There's a leader who cares and looks. It's like you asked me, would you vote for this? Well, it doesn't have to be black and white. You have to look for the third path that makes everything work. Yeah. And a lot of little political things that I've done in my life to make everything work out are along that same line, the way Picard would handle something.
You don't like DS9?
There are parts of DS9 that were good, but I feel like...
Watch it. Careful.
DS9 would have been a fantastic series if it hadn't been Star Trek, but it went so far against Roddenberry's vision that I feel like that just I wish it had been its own series as opposed to Star Trek. Yeah. I feel like TNG really got Roddenberry's vision coalesced into what it needed to be. And I feel like DS9 was its own thing. Yeah. And it was good for what it was. It felt like they went back. So did Voyager. They both kind of went in this other direction that made a much darker series that wasn't what Roddenberry was presenting. He was presenting hope.
Yeah.
And, I mean, DS9, there's an entire episode where a whole planet's history's worth of people are wiped out in like one blink of an eye, and that kind of depressing outcome is never something we would have seen on TNG.
That's true.
I'm a hopeful person. I want the TNG side.
If you could sing one song on The Voice, what would it be?
I've never watched The Voice. Wasn't there an episode with like
American
Ryan?
Idol? Then let's say American Idol.
I don't watch those kind of shows.
Neither do I.
I know I watched a little bit of American Idol when it first came out, and I remember the gal that won in the beginning,
Kelly Clarkson.
Kelly Clarkson. They had a cool song they wrote for her, so I guess
you let them write you a song, then I guess.
Sure, I'll let them write me. I just come up with my own jingle. In the assembly race, vote for Brandii Grace.
That's great.
They can just turn that into a hit.
Do you believe in Bigfoot?
No. I lived in Washington.
Who would play you in a movie? I literally Googled like goofy questions. Right? So
Me.
Okay. Boxers or briefs?
I'm just going to go back on that. Like there was a reporter that talked about me entering the race and listed me as an actress. So if I'm going to be listed as an actress, why not? I'll play myself in my own movie. I'm not male. Boxers or briefs? I'm a female.
This is just how you prefer. What you prefer. Are you pro or anti garden gnome?
I've never owned one, but I'm not against them.
Okay.
Neutral.
All right. There's I don't know if it's true, but there.
Unless you mean a real gnome, and that's.
Well, then you have to worry about gnomes' rights or something like
exactly.
that.
I was going to say those poor gnomes. You make them stand out all day.
What's your favorite movie?
Ooh, good question. Hard question. Wow, I don't know. I have several that I watch all the time. I'm just going to lean hard geek and say probably the first Sailor Moon movie.
First what?
Sailor Moon movie.
I didn't even know they had a movie.
They had 3 movies.
Really?
One of them is okay. The other 2 are fun. Oh, you know what? I like the Super S one because it's cute. It's all about candy. It's a little dark. Ooh, there's a movie I really liked as a kid. The Unico movies. Those got really dark.
The what?
Unico, very old anime.
You're doing okay. You're really geeking out beyond me. I
super old anime. Super old.
After Akira Kurosawa and Ultraman, I stopped watching Japanese technology.
No! You gotta watch the. But I always did like Labyrinth. That was always my favorite as a kid.
Well,
so
David
maybe I'll
Bowie.
go that one. Oh yeah, David Bowie, exactly.
First concert.
Ninja Turtles in concert.
Really?
Yep.
Awesome.
I think I was the only girl there.
If you ever come back on the show, I'll give you $10 if you wear the tour shirt.
I didn't get the tour shirt. I was too poor.
Yeah, so much for a return visit then.
But I have the VHS tape of it.
Do you really?
Yeah, the one from New York where it has like. That was my mom had to save up for. My grandmother had to save up forever to get us the tickets so we could go, but we couldn't afford anything. But that was such a cool concert because it had a whole story where Shredder comes out and attacks the audience. And we weren't a main tour. We were an off the beaten path, middle of Idaho tour. So half the cast showed up, and they had to replace them with all the extras. So it was a smaller variant of it, but it was so much fun. And I got up and danced when no one else did. So Raphael pointed to me. I was so excited as a kid.
Do you have any tattoos?
Nope, not yet.
At all? If you were going to get one, what would it be, and where?
If I were going to get one, honestly, and I've considered it, it would be to replace my eyeliner. I would just do the eyeliner tattoo.
Okay. How Tammy Faye of you?
It just takes so long, and it's so easy to screw up. You don't have this problem, I can see, but it's such a pain. If I could just get rid of that, but I have a thing about needles, so I don't know if I could ever get a tattoo. Though my dad's been talking about getting one. I told him he should put the name of his first wife and a line through it, his second wife put a line through it. He didn't appreciate that suggestion.
All right, let me get your best evil villain laugh. That's good. That's a good one right there. And do you have
I'm sorry. Let me do that again. We have to do the anime version too.
That was spot on.
I played Jesse from Team Rocket.
Oh, did you really?
A few times.
Well, actually, I thought about that Pokemon when you did that immediately. So.
That's where I got that one from. I won an award one time for doing that.
Who's your favorite Pokemon?
Oh, Mew.
Mew, really?
Yeah.
Over Bulbasaur?
Bulbasaur. I've got a cute little cat with incredible psychic powers that's adorable. Goes, Mew. Why would I go with Bulbasaur?
Because Bulbasaur is just the coolest. Bulbasaur kicks butt every time he's in a match, and I just, I've gotten into arguments with my kid over it.
Adorable psychic cat. I actually had a friend of mine in college who, for my birthday, drew a picture of me as Mew, and it's like, it was so cute.
Okay, you should put that up on your website.
No, that's okay. Yeah. It was very sweet that she drew all of us as our favorite Pokemon in our group, and it was just very sweet.
Okay, you got a joke for us? If you don't have a joke, you have to rap.
I have to rap.
Yeah.
Well, if I'm going to have to do a rap, I'd have to do the poker rap, or I'd have to do.
Do you know the poker rap?
I had it memorized at one point, or I could just do the Team Rocket rap.
What's the Team Rocket rap? I don't know that.
You want it in English or Japanese?
Oh my God! I'm almost embarrassed for you.
That's been too long. I have to see if I can remember it. Nanda kanda tochikara dara tokutai no tai no teru no yorosake. Sekai no hekai o sei o tame. Sekai no hewa o mamoru tame. Ai to shinjitsu no aku wa sora no ku. Rabari zamen ga katsuyaku. Musashi Kojiro Gingo kakeru rokete no futari ni wa White hole shiroi yoste ga matteru ze. I know I screwed that up terribly, but
it's like the Japanese have a different word for everyone we have.
You think? Let's see if I remember the team. Prepare for trouble, make it double. To protect the world from devastation, to unite all peoples within our nation, to denounce the evils of truth and love, to extend our reach to the stars above. Jesse James. I don't want you to forget that part.
Don't they just go Team Rocket? Don't they just say Team Rocket after that? Or?
No, there's like one more line, and then it's Team Rocket. Blast off at the speed of light. Surrender now or prepare to fight. No, that's right.
That's better than any joke you can do. Well, look, I wish you very much luck with the campaign. I've certainly been impressed with the amount of policy that you know, and you are a wonk and a geek and a nerd. You are part of my brethren.
And I'll make one quick plug.
Yes.
Because I'm so happy that the Communication Workers of America endorsed me, because I helped establish their new project code. So for anyone out there who's a game developer or interested in becoming, look up the CWA's project, CODE, the Campaign to Organize Digital Art Employees. Okay. It's about unionizing games and tech in general.
Yeah.
And I
something that needs to be done, I think.
Yeah. So I helped establish that by putting together the Game Workers Unite group and the CWA. And that's been launched recently. AOC just tweeted in favor of it. Bernie Sanders spoke in favor of it before. So I highly recommend. We just had a survey that came out and said that the majority of developers were in favor of unionizing.
That's great.
Yeah,
that's great.
This is something I want to plug for people to go out and support, because we need it.
Well, if you make it past the primary, I hope you'll come back on the show.
Definitely.
I wish you much luck.
Thank you.
And Brandii, it's nice meeting you. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you. And for those out there, remember, Brandii with 2 eyes.
2 eyes. There you go. We hope you guys enjoyed the talk.
You've been listening to The Talk of Santa Clarita. Listen to us on iTunes, SoundCloud.com, YouTube, and Stitcher. Barring a life event getting in the way, a new podcast is available every Tuesday. Questions, comments, and show ideas can be sent to thetalkofsantaclarita@gmail.com. You can also call or text us at 661-505-8672. That's 661-505-8672. Follow us on Twitter at The Talk of SC, or on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at The Talk of Santa Clarita. You can also visit our website by going to www.thetalkofsantaclarita.com. This has been a production of Radio Free Santa Clarita Incorporated, a 501c3 nonprofit organization. To donate, go to radiofreesantaclarita.org/donate. Radio Free Santa Clarita, on the net and on the air, and we're very much aware.
Any questions?